My father stayed in New Orleans, and my mother stayed in Richmond, California, so I've been going back and forward as a youth, growing up, being able to learn both sides, and I think that's where the Master P, the whole TRU, gumbo style come from, you know, because we got all different kind of flavors, because we done seen both sides.
He second to the oldest brother.
What happened to him? What happened to Kevin?
They say his best friend tried to rob him for some dope, because Kevin was selling dope.
Kev was a gangster. You know, Kev was a gangster.
Kevin was low key. Cause see, Kevin got killed like 2 months after I got shot up July 25th. Kevin got killed like in September.
He was supposed to be on his way to California with Pete.
When Kevin got killed, P had enough sense to say, you know what, I have to come up with a game plan.
I really love the music to be able to tell my story. And when people was coming into my store and buying the music, I'm like, man, I really been through some stuff.
Yeah.
So I want to be able to tell it. And then when my brother got killed, I really just went hard, like I wanted to change my life.
Yeah.
Because, you know, I watched what my mom went through. Mm-hmm. And I watched her cry, and I watched, I can't put this woman through that. I got to do something.
Yeah.
And so that's when I really started getting into it.
In 1968, Kevin Miller was born into a world where survival wasn't guaranteed, and dreams seemed like luxuries reserved for those born on the other side of the tracks. The Calliope Projects in the 3rd Ward of uptown New Orleans wasn't just a place. It was a test of endurance, a battleground where families fought daily against poverty, violence, and despair. Kevin Miller, alongside his siblings Percy, Jermaine, Corey, and Vashon, would navigate these treacherous waters with a combination of street smarts, family bonds, and an unwavering determination to make something of themselves. Born to Josie and Percy Miller Sr., Kevin's childhood was marked by deprivation that many couldn't fathom. The family lacked basic necessities. There were days when food was scarce, when the electricity would be cut off, and when the cold New Orleans nights felt even colder inside their project apartment. But what they lacked in material possessions, they made up for in love and loyalty. The Miller children were inseparable, bound together by circumstances that forced them to depend on each other in ways that children shouldn't have to. Kevin grew up watching his neighborhood transform into a war zone. The crack epidemic of the 1980s hit the Calliope Projects like a tsunami, bringing with it violence, addiction, and death. Young men who Kevin had played basketball with as children were now soldiers in a drug war that claimed lives with horrifying regularity. The sound of gunshots became as common as the sound of children playing, and funerals became routine events that the community attended with numb resignation. Despite the darkness surrounding him, Kevin found moments of light. He was known throughout the projects for his charisma and his street smarts. Unlike his younger brother Percy, who would later become Master P, Kevin wasn't drawn to music or sports as an escape. He was drawn to the streets themselves. He understood the codes, the hierarchies, the unwritten rules that govern survival in the Calliope. This understanding made him valuable, respected, and ultimately vulnerable. When Kevin was 11 years old, his parents divorced, and his mother Josie made the difficult decision to move to Richmond, California, taking most of the children with her. Percy, who would become Master P, eventually followed his mother to California, seeking opportunities that New Orleans couldn't offer. But Kevin stayed behind with his father in the Calliope Projects. This decision would shape the trajectory of his life in ways that no one could have predicted at the time. While Percy was in California, discovering his passion for music and entrepreneurship, Kevin was deepening his involvement in the streets of New Orleans. The brothers maintained their bond despite the distance, but their lives were diverging down drastically different paths. Percy was dreaming of escaping the ghetto through music, inspired by how Michael Jackson had lifted his family from poverty. Kevin, meanwhile, was surviving day by day in an environment where planning for the future seemed naive when making it through the present was challenge enough. September 26, 1990, started like any other day in the Calliope Projects. Kevin, now 22 years old, went about his usual routine, checking in with people he needed to see, handling business, staying aware of the constantly shifting dynamics of the streets. As the day progressed, he connected with Kenneth Williams and another man, Melvin Ratcliffe, who was 21 years old. The three of them had business to discuss, deals to finalize, money to count. It was routine, unremarkable, the kind of meeting that happened hundreds of times every day in neighborhoods like the Calliope. The three men got into a vehicle together, with Kenneth Williams behind the wheel. They were headed to Kenner, Louisiana, a suburb of New Orleans, to conduct their business away from the Calliope, a common practice when people wanted to handle sensitive transactions without the prying eyes and ears of the neighborhood watching. Kevin sat in the vehicle, relaxed, unguarded around people he considered friends. He had no reason to believe this day would be any different from the countless other days he had spent conducting business in cars, in apartments, in parking lots throughout the greater New Orleans area. As they drove through Kenner, an argument erupted inside the vehicle. The exact details of what sparked the confrontation remain unclear. Was it about money owed, about a deal gone wrong, about disrespect real or imagined? Different accounts suggest different triggers, but what's certain is that the atmosphere inside that vehicle transformed from casual to hostile with frightening speed. Kevin, who had navigated countless tense situations in his 22 years, suddenly found himself in a confrontation he couldn't talk his way out of. The argument escalated. Voices were raised. Accusations were made. Kevin's street instincts, which had kept him alive this long, must have started screaming warnings at him. But he was trapped in a moving vehicle with people who had suddenly revealed themselves to be enemies rather than friends. The betrayal was absolute and immediate. One moment, he was conducting business with associates. The next, he was fighting for his life. In an act of sudden and brutal violence, Kenneth Williams pulled out a gun and opened fire on Kevin at close range inside the vehicle. The first bullets tore into Kevin's body, causing catastrophic injuries. Kevin, despite being hit, fought to survive, but trapped in the confined space of the car, there was nowhere to escape. Kenneth Williams fired multiple times, ensuring that Kevin wouldn't survive to tell what had happened. The reports would later state that Kevin was shot 9 times, in the head, in the back, in the chest. Each bullet was a betrayal. Each shot fired by someone Kevin had trusted, someone he had considered a friend. Melvin Ratcliffe, the third person in the vehicle, was later charged as an accessory, suggesting he played a role in either planning the attack or facilitating it in some way. Whether he restrained Kevin, whether he had lured him into the vehicle under false pretenses, or whether he simply failed to intervene as his friend was murdered, his involvement would result in criminal charges. After murdering Kevin, Williams and Ratcliffe faced the grim task of disposing of his body. They drove to St. John the Baptist Parish, a rural area outside of New Orleans, and dumped Kevin's body on a roadside like garbage, like something worthless that they wanted to discard and forget. There was no dignity in death for Kevin Miller, no respect shown for the life they had just taken. His body lay on that roadside, exposed to the elements, as his killers fled back to New Orleans, believing they had gotten away with murder. For days, Kevin's body remained where it had been dumped, decomposing in the Louisiana heat and humidity. During this time, his family in both New Orleans and California didn't know what had happened to him. Kevin's father noticed his son was missing, but in the Calliope projects, people disappeared for various reasons. Sometimes they were lying low from the police, sometimes they had left town to avoid enemies, sometimes they were simply conducting business elsewhere. Initially, there was no reason to assume the worst, even though the worst is what had occurred. When Kevin's body was finally discovered by local authorities in St. John the Baptist Parish, the scene was horrific. The multiple gunshot wounds told the story of an execution, not a random act of violence or a robbery gone wrong. This was personal, deliberate, and brutal. The condition of the body, after days in the elements, made identification more difficult, but eventually, through various means, authorities determined that the victim was Kevin Miller, 22 years old, from New Orleans. The news traveled fast through official channels. Police contacted Kevin's father in New Orleans, who then faced the impossible task of informing the rest of his family that Kevin was dead, murdered, his body dumped like trash. In California, Percy Miller received a phone call that would change his life forever. His brother, his friend, the person he had grown up with in the Calliope projects, was gone. Kevin would never see the success that Percy would achieve, never hold his own son who would be born after his death, never escape the streets that had ultimately consumed him. Percy Miller, who was just beginning to establish himself in the music industry as Master P, immediately dropped everything and returned to New Orleans. The grief was overwhelming. The guilt of having left Kevin behind, the anger at the senselessness of his death, the rage at whoever had done this to his brother. Percy had been working on building something legitimate, something that would bring his family out of poverty without resorting to the streets, and now his brother was dead, killed by the same streets Percy had been trying to escape. The news also reached Corey Miller, who was serving in the United States Army as a combat medic. Corey, who would later become the rapper C-Murder, requested emergency leave and returned home to bury his brother. The Miller family, already fractured by divorce and distance, now gathered in New Orleans for the worst possible reason, to say goodbye to Kevin and to try to make sense of a tragedy that had no sense to make. The police investigation into Kevin Miller's murder moved quickly once his body was identified. Detectives interviewed people in the Calliope projects, following leads and collecting testimonies from individuals who had seen Kevin in the days and hours before his death. The street has its own code of silence, but murder investigations have a way of loosening tongues. People who might not cooperate with police on lesser crimes often reconsider when someone they knew has been murdered in such a brutal fashion. Witnesses came forward, some reluctantly, others more willing, providing information that led investigators to Kenneth Williams and Melvin Ratcliffe. The story began to come together. The business meeting, the vehicle ride to Kenner, the argument, the shooting, the body dump. Physical evidence corroborated the witness statements. The murder weapon was recovered. Phone records, financial records, and other forensic evidence built a case that prosecutors believed was strong enough to bring charges. Kenneth Williams was convicted of second-degree murder in the death of Kevin Miller. The verdict meant that Williams would spend decades behind bars, his own life effectively over before it had really begun. For some in the community, this was justice. For others, it was simply more tragedy piled on top of existing tragedy. Another young black man going to prison, another life wasted, another family devastated. The cycle of violence and incarceration that plagued communities like the Calliope claimed another victim, even as it delivered a measure of accountability. Melvin Ratcliffe was also convicted on charges related to his role in Kevin's murder. The sentences handed down reflected the serious nature of the crimes, but they also reflected the broader tragedy of young men caught in a system that offered them few legitimate opportunities and then punished them severely when they pursued illegal ones. None of this brought comfort to Kevin's family, but it did provide a sense of closure, a recognition that what had been done to Kevin was wrong and that those responsible would pay a price. Master P has worked to honor Kevin's memory through his success, through his community outreach, through his efforts to provide opportunities for young people growing up in circumstances similar to those he and Kevin experienced. The No Limit reunion tours and various anniversary events celebrating the label's legacy always include acknowledgments of Kevin, ensuring that fans understand the personal tragedy that motivated much of what Master P created. As the city of New Orleans continues to grapple with poverty, violence, and lack of opportunity in neighborhoods like the Calliope projects, Kevin Miller's story remains relevant. It's a story of potential unfulfilled, of a system that failed a young man who deserved better, of a family that lost someone they loved and can never get back. His son grew up without ever knowing his father, carrying that absence through his own life. The ripples of Kevin's death continue to spread through the Miller family and through the community that knew him. May Kevin Miller's story serve as a reminder of the urgent need to address the conditions that create environments where young men feel they have no choice but to enter the drug trade, where violence is commonplace, where betrayal and death are constant threats. May his memory live on through his family, through the music that honors him, and through the continued efforts to break the cycles of poverty and violence that claimed his life.